Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not an accountant, but I will agree with you that this is an exciting meeting. I did serve on several audit committees of large public corporations, so I know how important it is when you're making business decisions to have accurate information. And I applaud you, Mr. Dodaro, for what you're doing. I think this is so critical to us as we start looking at the process and try to get a long-term strategy to bring this debt more under control. I agree with Senator Warner and Senator King. We've had these conversations before, and this is not a partisan issue. That's the encouraging thing about it. This is not about how you spend money or how you cut expenses or whatever. This is about getting an accurate reading of what we are doing. And so my observation, and I've got a couple of questions I'd love to get your thoughts on, because this is going to be an ongoing dialogue here. This is not something we're going to have a hearing on and then forget about it, because I'm absolutely committed that, as is the chairman and other people, you can see that you've got people who have been sitting here for 2 hours or over an hour and a half now trying to move this thing forward. But since the Reform Act, Government Management Reform Act it was 22 years ago, and 20 years ago, the first publication of the consolidated financial statement, we're sitting here today, and this is not a critique on you. It's the systems. You mentioned DOD earlier, but we still don't have an accurate balance sheet that would stand up to audit. Right. I find that remarkable. And our goal should be to solve that as soon as possible. And I'm going to have a question I want to come back. But I just look at redundant agencies, improper payments, and taxes not paid. You know, my math is that's $500–600 billion. You know, you add this up, pretty soon you're talking about serious money. Well, I don't know why we don't shut the trains down going to the Capitol. I don't know why we don't just shut everything else and focus on this. Is not about cutting Social Security or doing anything else. This is just prudent, responsible stewardship of taxpayer money. This is not a small thing, and I know you know that. You're a preacher for that. I'm voicing one person's, and I think I speak for a few other members here, support to try to help you get there. I'm worried about accrual accounting versus cash accounting, and that therein lies another disparity of over almost $100 billion of difference between the GAO estimate of an annual deficit and other estimates of the annual deficit. There's no capital budget. I think Senator King talked about that, and I agree 100% with Senator King that if you don't maintain it, it's like deferred maintenance. If you don't spend that money on maintenance every year or on infrastructure, that is a future unfunded liability, is the way I look at it. And so we don't talk about that as well, but that's a second step. DOD. Right now, DOD is somewhere around $600 billion. People say, well, that's just too large to audit. Well, Walmart's not much smaller than that. As a matter of fact, it's pretty close to being about the same size. Imagine if Mike Duke or any of the other leaders down there came into the SEC or the IRS and said, boys, I'm sorry, we're just too big to be audited. We'll defer next year. I don't think that'd work very well. Yeah. And so I'm over this too large to be audited thing. And so it's time we get a real accounting of that. Long-term debt, it's just unsustainable. It's the reason we're starting this process. So the question I have is, what do we have to do to help you break through the impediments to get a consolidated balance sheet that can stand up to audit?
Yeah. Well, I think there are two things. You mentioned DOD. There are three main impediments to us giving.
Well, it's much bigger than DOD, though.
Pardon me?
Right? It's much bigger than DOD. I mean, they're one of the largest culprits, but there
Right.
are other large agencies as well.
Well, actually, that's the bright spot in this picture. When we first started in 1996 was the first year that all 24 major departments and agencies had to prepare statements and have an audit. So we went 200 years of our history without an audit, even though federal government used to not give the state and local governments money unless they had an audit, but that's a different story. Right now, this past year, 21 of the 24 departments and agencies have been able to get a clean opinion.
You said that,
the two that, aside from DOD, that did not get a clean opinion, HUD and Agriculture, have had clean opinions in the past, so they've had some recent problems. The Department of Homeland Security was an outlier for years, but for now, the last 3 years, they've had a unmodified opinion. So really, when you look at the major departments and agencies, DOD is the one.
That's encouraging.
It is the only one. But they hold about 30% of all the government's assets and about 15% of its net costs. The other problems are at the Treasury Department working with the agencies where there are hundreds of billions of dollars of activity among the federal agencies that can't properly be eliminated. Right now, because of that, there's a very polite line in the statement that says unmatched disbursements and transactions. Yeah, basically, it's a plug figure for things that they can't account for properly to put in to make the statements balanced, but it's not accurate. And so that's a big problem. And there's still problems in compiling the information from the audited financial statements of the agencies with Treasury's process. So that DOD really is the main obstacle along with these other processes. Now, Treasury has a good plan.
So, sorry, I'm out of time, but I want to
okay.
ask you, I understand they're the problem.
Okay.
My question is, what can we do to break through the impediment to get a balance sheet that will stand up to audit?
Yeah, I think you have to help us hold DOD accountable for making progress.
They're working on it right now.
They're working on it, but they're not really fixing the underlying problems. I mean, they have a good plan for the first time. You know, right now, the last year, in 2015, the only audits they had of Army, Navy, and the Air Force were 1 year's budget activities. And they weren't able to pass the test of an audit on 1 year budget activity at the department. The financial requirements are for a multi-year budget audit. They haven't even started on a balance sheet or net cost statement as well. The auditors this year made over 900 specific findings and recommendations for things that need to be fixed. That's on top of everything GAO and the IGs have said. So they have to fix the underlying problems. They don't have necessarily all the talent that they need and experienced people. Congress could help there. There needs to be more, they need to be held accountable for their systems investments. They continue to make system investments that don't produce better systems that are in place, but they're not fixing the internal control problems. They can't reconcile their balance between what they say they have and what Treasury says that they have. They are not estimating environmental liabilities properly, and they have a huge potential exposure there in addition to the Energy Department. So there are fundamental problems. They have anti-deficiency violations. They've had about $1 billion of anti-deficiency violations where they're spending money that they shouldn't have been spending in those areas. So this should be of concern to every member of Congress. We could use your support in helping them get the resources and the incentives necessary to make the necessary changes.
Well, thank you, and I look forward to working with you on this. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just